Welcome to the 2020 Spring Book Club Author Visit. The Water Book Club welcomes staff, faculty, and students that want to discuss water issues. It started 3 years ago as part of the Water Cohort's campus-wide Common Read initiative. Today, we welcome Mark Arax, author of the Dreamt Land, for a casual discussion. Thank you for joining us.
So I started with something that I've done before in my other books, which is give folks a sense of what this place is like. And, the middle of California obviously doesn't get the attention that the Bay Area and Southern California get. Oftentimes when, they just kind of skip over the middle. And so I was trying to give folks a sense of what it's like to be on what I call the other side of the Mason-Dixon line. If there's a Mason-Dixon line that separates kind of cultures in California, to me, it's when you come from Southern California and you go up the Grapevine and, down the Grapevine, and you come and you see that divide that separates the sprawl of Los Angeles from a different kind of sprawl in the valley. And that vantage is always interesting. So in this book, I am traveling from Fresno to the south, to Kern County, and I just give a sense of the spread of the land and everything else, and then what is going on in that land. And at this point, it was the middle of drought, and people were trying to figure out how to, how to keep their crops watered, and there was a kind of, craziness going on. They were pumping an ungodly amount of water from the earth, so much so that it was sinking, not by inches, but by feet. And so I'm out on the land, and I'm describing the first 4 chapters, what I'm seeing. I'm out in the black settlement outside of Madera with folks who came west. They followed the Cotton Trail west in the 40s and 50s, kind of their own Shangri-La they came to. And what became of them? Well, in the drought, their homesteads were drying up because these almond growers were planting so many almonds in and around there. That was a place called Fairmead. And for those of you who've read The King of California, you'll know that I spent a good deal of time telling the story of the Black Okies who came west and followed the Cotton Trail in the 40s and 50s. And they were very unique because the Black Okies did something that no blacks really had done. They didn't go to the big city, that migration from the south to Detroit and Chicago and New York, and if it came west, it went to LA and Oakland to work in the shipyards. These African Americans wanted to keep the rural alive, so they went from rural South, rural Oklahoma, rural Arkansas, to rural California, in the middle of California. And they came here thinking that this was tall cotton. They were going to have a different life. But what they found was they were locked out of the cities and towns. They couldn't live in Corcoran. They couldn't live in Hanford. They couldn't live necessarily in Fresno. So they had to set up these settlements on the outskirts of those towns. And they set them up in the worst ground. It was basically salt, alkali ground. If you looked at it, it was white. It almost looked like it had snowed there. So I wanted to go back and revisit that narrative. So I went to Fairmead, and they were drying up. And then, we're talking about all that. Then about chapter 4 to 5, it occurred to me at that point in my journey that, well, where did this all begin? Where did this culture of extracting water begin? How did the movement of water begin? How did the building of these systems, one-of-a-kind systems in the world, begin? And so naturally, we have to go back into history. The first way I wrote this was I had all my chapters were present-day chapters on the land with farmers and stuff like that, and then I would pivot backward to the history. But the problem was the history was so long in the telling that you would lose where you were. You were thinking, well, okay, I'm with the farmer right now. Now we're back in history, and then 30 pages later, we rejoin the farmer. That didn't quite work. It required even more patience of the reader. So I decided, well, let's just go to history. Let's do a big chunk of history in the middle. I've been up and down the West Coast from San Diego to Seattle, kind of before COVID hit, introducing and reading this book to folks. Some really liked the history more than anything. Others thought it was a big clump there in the middle that slowed things down. But I felt that this book had to be a definitive book telling the story of what we built here to try to defy our essential nature, which is one part of this state gets all the snow and water, and the other part of the state, the most populous part of the state, is where most of the people live. How do you move that across 1,000 miles? It's not an easy thing. So I thought, well, let's start with the gold rush. And that's indeed where my editor wanted to start, because that is where the culture of extraction begins. That's where the movement of the rivers begin, not in irrigation canals and via concrete dams, but early dams, early ditches that were really wooden flumes. Those were the ditches. But then I thought, wait a second, the extraction culture of California begins before the gold rush. There was a California here, and it began with the native Californians, the largest concentration of indigenous in North America, 300,000 indigenous here, and when the friars from Spain came up to try to make those folks godly in their eyes, they built those incredible missions, that whole kind of constellation of missions up and down the state of California. And so the first extraction in California is the taking of the body of the Indian. By virtue of that, by dint of that, maybe it wasn't so virtuous, and it wasn't. By dint of that, they were able then to take the first rivers and create the first farms on those missions. So that's where the history begins. And then we see that extraction culture grow more and more industrialized, so that the men who made the most money on gold ended up being the men who planted the first major crops in California. And that first crop was wheat. We took the interior of California and we created these baronies of wheat. And we had a guy like Isaac Friedlander. He was a giant of a man, 6'7", over 300 pounds. They said his stride was twice the stride of a normal man's. He had made a lot of money in gold mining before the gold mining shut down, because it was polluting the early farms of California. And he decided to industrialize wheat. And so he planted these huge swaths of wheat in the middle, and then had these early machines harvesting it, and then had all these clipper ships that would take that wheat from California all the way to Liverpool. And Europe went crazy over California wheat. I think they called it white velvet or something like that. And there was a problem, though, in that farming. It was a monoculture of farming, and wheat stole from the ground. And at some point, the ground wasn't as fertile, and those yields of wheat started going down. At one point, we grew more wheat than any spot in the world, and then it went down. And that's when a new culture supplanted the wheat culture. That was the fruit and nut culture. And that culture allowed for smaller people to come in and farm. It didn't have to be so industrialized in the early part of it. And that's when you saw the early taking of the rivers and the siphoning of those river flows into canals and ditches, and then ultimately dams. And that was the culture that brought my grandfather here in 1920. So I developed my grandfather as a character and what brings him here, and the rising of this fruit and nut culture. This realization that California, the weather in the middle of California, the incredible soil in California allows for a kind of specialty farming that you can't do anywhere else in the world. And we were growing crops that you can't grow anywhere else in the world. And that first culture was raisins. And then we see a bunch of raisin busts happen. Too many raisins planted, too many Thompson seedless grape vineyards planted, and then we see different crops and more crops. What the middle part of that book really shows is how the culture of California was never satisfied with what it had done. It had to keep growing. And so we see agriculture go from the best land with the easiest access to river water to land that's more marginal. And when my grandfather arrives in 1920, we see the development of the turbine pump that now allows the farmer to go into the ground to start siphoning that huge underground lake that existed because of millennia of snow melt that percolated down into the aquifer. And that allows the farmer's footprint, the agricultural footprint, to go from primo land to good land to more marginal land. And then in the 1920s, in this incredible drought, even worse maybe than the one we went through recently, the aquifer starts to get too low. They're pumping too much. Their pumps can't reach those things. And that's when the cry goes out that we're turning into a dust bowl. Our farms are drying up. We need an outside river to bring in. And that was the rise of the Central Valley Project, the greatest irrigation waterworks in the history of man. So the idea is you take the San Joaquin River and you take it out of its flow and you actually box it up, bottle it up, and move it to Kern County and Tulare County, where those farms are going dry because their local rivers and aquifer aren't enough to support the kind of farming they want to do, growing more. So we moved the San Joaquin River 160 miles south all the way to Bakersfield. And so how do you replace the San Joaquin River? Well, you move in the Sacramento River, the excess flows of the Sacramento River. Sacramento is flooding, remember. It's got too much water. And so they bring that river, the excess flows of it, and bring it and water the San Joaquin with new water. And that satisfies things for a time, but then agriculture wants to grow even more, and it wants to go onto even poorer ground. And so there is the new system added to the Central Valley Project on the west side, which brings in the Westlands Water District, the areas of Mendota and Huron. That becomes farmland now. And they have to add to the Central Valley Project and bring more water from the Delta along the western edge of the valley. Remember, the Frying Kern Canal that's delivering San Joaquin River water to Bakersfield is along the east side. Along the west side, they create the California Aqueduct, our concrete river that runs 444 miles. And ultimately, to get the support of the cities, it's decided that they're going to build a state water project on top of the Central Valley Project, a federal project, and they move the water then all the way to Kern County, the west side, and up and over the mountain into LA and its suburbs. So this is the grand engineering that we do. And we build more and more suburbs from it, and we build more and more farmland from it, to the point that when the weather defies us, as it does in California, we then have this water wars that are going on. And we have overgrown suburbia, and we have overgrown the farmland. And so that's when the book then, after it sets up the building of those systems from Father Sarah's time to the 1960s, and how LA was formed by taking the Owens River. That's when I then return to the land in present day and take you, the reader, to these farming empires that have never told their story, kind of like Boswell. And we start with Resnick, who's now the new king of California. So that's the organizational structure. And I think it starts flying at that point, and you can get all the way to the end. But you got to get through that little rough spot in the middle, which sets up all the history. So for those of you who couldn't make it through that, there's always the audio version. Of course, that means you have to listen to my voice for I don't know how many hours. It's like 20 some. So that's what I was trying to do, trying to bring in my own family story, the story in the land. We never lose my family's story. It's threaded throughout. And, and I'm telling stuff. I'm talking about, how I wrote a story once and Bruce Springsteen read it and wrote a song about it. And I put that in there. I'm just trying the best I can to keep you guys engaged. So, and trying to do it with the best writing possible. So that's what I tried to do. And I just want to say thank you for reading it. And now let's have a conversation.
Thank you, Mark. And I think you absolutely accomplished that. You had us on there, and it was very easy to read. So like I said earlier, some of you sent me questions before, so I'll start with those. And if you have questions that you'd like Kaylee to ask for you, just put them in the chat. If you want to ask a question, just raise your hand, and then Kaylee will call us in. So you talked about how you were driving throughout California to find some of these stories and to talk to talk to these farmers to get some of the stories. But you seem to get very colorful descriptions of some of the people that lived such a long time ago. How did you do that? Did you do research on those personalities? Was it embellishment? Yeah. Was it just telling a story? How did you get so detailed about some of them?
So I've bent nonfiction about as far as you can bend it, but what took me so long, 5-6 years. In fact, I'm writing a novel now, so I'm freed up from all those facts. Now the novel is about this place in a story that is very compelling, but I don't have to be wedded to the literal facts. I can go everywhere. This one, you're wedded to the literal facts, which means to make it colorful like a novel, you have to research. Let's take Henry Miller, for example. Henry Miller is the cattle king. Mm-hmm. At some point, he owns more land than anybody in the United States. They say that he could ride his horse from the border of Mexico to the border of Canada and never spend a night on land that wasn't his. And so we tell his tale, arriving in California with $6 in his pocket, becoming a butcher, and then deciding, well, I'm cutting the meat, why don't I grow the cows? And he grows them and starts off in Los Banos with his first purchase. And he's a remarkable character, a lonely, sad man. And I found these documents in Los Banos that no one had really taken advantage of, letters and notes and journals that he had written to himself. And, I found them really captivating, compelling. This man was so fastidious. I mean, here he is, one of the richest men in the world. And he's partnered up with this guy named Lux, who's also very rich. And but he just can't let go of controlling this empire to the point where he's writing his farm workers and others and telling them that we have a problem with mice. We need to get cats to capture the mice. And so he's sending these cats, and he wants them to tell them how many mice the cats are catching. And, so it's just a level of, of being fastidious that is beyond. So to tell the rise of his empire, I get inside the psychology of the man, which makes him really interesting. And you could drive from 99 to 152 past Los Banos as you're heading to the coast and just into the Bay Area, and you could see his empire. You could see the actual canals and ditches that he carved on the land. They're still there, moving a great deal of water. So that's what I did. I just tried. It's a lot of research to get into the personalities and the narratives of these guys to make them interesting. So yeah, that was the task.
Thank you.
And we have Jeff who raised his hand, so he can go ahead and unmute himself and ask his question.
Sure thing. Yeah, Mark, just a couple things. One, you mentioned that you wanted to kind of give people from your vantage point and like give people a feel of it. And I'll just say, as a person that grew up here in Fresno, you had so many things that just hit right home, like in terms of people and places and stuff like that. It just really felt so familiar. So I just want to say I think it worked in that perspective. I have my Malik Mustangs hat here. I went to school there, but
you're a Mustang?
Yeah, but anyway.
All right on, man.
So I just I don't know if you can see that, but anyway, my question is, I just wanted to get your thoughts on a couple of takeaways I got from the book that are in a little bit of tension with each other. And so one is that we heard about how they're the big empire farms and how they were not as invested in the area, like emotionally or personally. And
that's in the west. Yeah, you're talking about on the west side in the Westlands Water District. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, and so like those people are not sending their kids to school there. They're not drinking the water there, living there. Just not maybe as personally invested in the area as, say, a smaller farmer. And then that causing all associated problems with that. So then you have that. And then also we have this like tragedy of the commons with the management of water in the state. Yeah. And Sigma seems to be like it's our best tool at this point to tackle that. But seems like what may happen with that is that there's going to be increased like administrative burdens and like maybe a higher cost of operation from doing that. But we kind of need to do it in order to get on top of things. But my concern is that it could lead to more like consolidation,
concentration, ownership.
Yeah, all that. So how do we, so those two things.
Okay, so let's excellent question. So one of the things I try to show in the book, especially to outsiders, is there's not one valley. There's actually 3, if not 4 valleys. They feel different. They look different. They smell different. And it all has to do with that place's relationship to water. How much work does it take to get the water? The more work it takes, the more the place is impoverished and looks like kind of a plantation culture. So we start on the east side, that beautiful east side, okay, right up there against the Sierra. The towns of Orange Cove, Exeter, Lindsay, Visalia, and it's pretty. And the water is fairly available, okay? And the planting of a citrus culture there allowed for smaller farms, because citrus, you can make a good amount of dough there on small acres. And these are places where the children of the farmers and the children of the farm workers go to school together, and they're actual real communities, okay? Then you move to the center valley, the middle valley, and it has even better access to the water, because the water, as it flows down, pools underneath there, and you have the Kings River running through and the other rivers, and even today that you could take water from 70, 80 feet deep, good water, and that's where small farms started too. And there's still a small farming culture there, although I worry that it's getting bigger and bigger. And those are the towns of Fowler and Selma and Kingsburg, right? And the kids of the farmers and the farm workers are going to school together. And these little beautiful football stadiums are carved out of the vineyards. And on Friday night, the lights are shining and everybody's mixing. And these are places that are sustainable. If they're not the Jeffersonian ideal of farming, 40, 60, 80 acres, 160, there's something close. And then we move to the west side, where the groundwater, where there are no rivers running through it, and the groundwater is at 1,000 feet, if not deeper. This takes a kind of extraction. And the extraction creates a different kind of farming, a more of an importation of labor. And the farmers don't live on that land. They live with me in the 93711 area code, okay? I mean zip code, zip code. So the relationship to the ground, to the people, is different. It can't help but be separated. And the further you are away geographically and psychically from the land, the more you can farm it as a kind of you know, something separate from yourself. And that's the problem with the West Side. So we have obviously a tragedy of commons where too many straws are into the earth, like you say, and whose land is more righteous. Well, and had we started this whole experiment out in California with saying, look at the rivers, we're going to let agriculture take 60 to 65, maybe even 70% of those rivers, but the 30% are going to stay inside those rivers. It would be a much different place. Instead, we let 99% of the rivers be used by agriculture, and so we overgrew the footprint of agriculture. How do you get it back down? How do you take something that is something and then reverse it? And it's very hard. And that's where Sigma, the groundwater, California, for all its progressiveness, we lead the nation in so many things, whether it was gay rights, whether it was air quality, water quality, all the things we did, the requirements we made on emissions from cars. We led the nation. We always lead the nation. But when it came to groundwater, we were way, way behind. We allowed for an extraction that almost no state did. And so in this last drought, the land is sinking, our infrastructure is sinking. That great concrete river doesn't send the flow north to south the way it used to. There are dead spots because it's sunk itself. And so we're spending tens of millions of dollars in electricity trying to pump water north to south through those dead spots that became sunken because of the overpumping. So Sigma allows us to restart this. It's going to be very painful. Will it happen? It's going to be really interesting to see over the next 10, 15 years. Will the farms on the bad land go out of production? Will we find a way to somehow compensate those farmers and shrink the footprint of agriculture to a place where it's more sustainable? And what's that mean in terms of acreage? Well, we're at 6 million acres of farmland in the San Joaquin Valley alone. We probably have to get to somewhere around 4.5 million to be more sustainable. Now, as you raise the cost of farming, the cost of water, that means you're giving more an incentive for hedge funds and pension funds to come in here and take over the land. So how do we design the water selling system that allows for smaller farmers to still survive? Well, those smaller farmers that have access to river water because their family started farming 80, 90 years ago, they will find a way to survive if their kids want to continue to farm. If not, they'll sell out. It'll be a sad day when we continue to lose that kind of farming, that attachment to the ground. So we'll see what happens. But from a environmental standpoint, we have to reduce that footprint of agriculture.
Mm-hmm. So you were talking just a few minutes ago about how can we go back, or can we even go back? So I have a similar related question that says, the Oracle list on page 508 seems to be pretty in line with what we've read and what you've just said. How much do you agree with it, and how much is it actually feasible or likely to happen? Especially the part about rating ag land by quality and the state limiting sprawl and setting an ag preservation zone rather than the county supervisors who get the money from development.
Bravo to whoever asked that question. Was that you, Laura, or is that somebody else?
No, it was sent in.
Okay. So the problem is land use is in the hands of these county supervisors. They're almost all, there's a lot of good old boys on that thing, and they're not very progressive. So they end up approving all sorts of sprawl and things like that. I'd like to see the state, even though I'm not a big fan of the state getting more and more involved in things that should be local, but we've shown ourselves not to be able to handle growth. I mean, I saw that when I finished this book. The next story I did was a story of Paradise, that place that burned off the map.
Mm-hmm.
And the story was a long story in California Sunday Magazine, but it focused on one central question: how did we build a sprawled community of 40,000 people in the path of wildfire? And if you look at the urban wildlands interface in California, 10 million Californians, a quarter of our population, a quarter of it lives in the path of wildfire. And here, this place, Paradise, that ridge outside of well, it's in Butte. It was like a geological chimney. I mean, we're just practically begging nature to do what it does. So we're not very good at figuring out where to put places. And maybe if the state guided the locals some, not unlike they're doing on Sigma, we might, get some more sanity to this. I mean, in the life of this project, we went from 10 million people to 40 million. How many more Californians can be added to that trough? I don't know. Certainly not many more, and us be able to keep this incredible farmland in the middle. So ask that again. So the county soups aren't doing that, and that list, that question refers to the list that I come up with when I'm in the car with the Oracle. Is that what that list is?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So there's a couple things on there that I think are interesting. One, is the value of water and farmland in the San Joaquin Valley such that we really shouldn't be having mega dairies anymore? And I know this is going to upset friends of mine who are Azorean, Portuguese, and Dutch. They're the folks who really have built this dairy industry in the middle of California. But it came up and over the mountain from Southern California. It came here, and can we really afford the groundwater contamination and the water use that is needed to support dairies that have 15, 20,000 Holsteins? The growing of silage, the growing of alfalfa. These are really water-guzzling crops. And I think the future of agriculture probably would prohibit those kinds of mega dairies. So that list, I hesitated coming up with solutions. I didn't, but I thought, no, I can't write a book this big and this definitive without offering up some. So that's that list of 10. I think it's a pretty good starting point. We'll see what happens with Sigma. Will the state bureaucrats have the strength, the will to enforce Sigma? Or are the models of Sigma right now that are being done by the locals, by the way, are they BS? There's some fighting going on right now in these where these plans are being put forward. Some farmers telling other farmers, no, that's not sustainable. Your model is wrong. You're just going to keep extracting. So we're going to have this period with lawsuits and other things as we're trying to work this out. And will the state stay strong? That's a big question.
Yes, thank you. So right before Kaylee asks her question, I just want to let Mark know that the group shared the link to your Paradise story. So I think we shared it a few weeks ago, but then they should just shared it again today. So Kaylee, Can you ask one of the questions, please?
Susan asked, what is your favorite part of the creation process, research, writing, and editing?
He wants to know a little bit about the creative process?
Yes.
What is your favorite part?
My favorite part, okay. They each have their joys and, and pains. Obviously, I really enjoy being out on the land with these folks, trying to capture them not as cardboard figures, You know, so much of what's going on in America right now, I'm not going to get into politics, but so much of it is these two polar opposite viewpoints of reality, okay? And everybody's divided, and you know, you go on social media and you see these kind of paranoid conspiracy theories being launched from one side, and then the other side comes up with some of its own, and it's like everybody has become a caricature. Okay, that's the last thing I wanted. What I wanted to do in this book was to complicate people, to find the messy, if not muddy, middle. Okay, that doesn't mean I'm equivocating and not telling a tough story, and that doesn't mean that I'm not even not declaring myself, you know, in here. But it means that I'm obligated to find the shadings of people, and this is what we've lost in this country. Okay. Someone might say, well, what gives you the right? You're a white dude. Well, I'm an Armenian, but to go to fair meet and tell the story of African Americans. And my answer to them is because I was there. I took the time. I had my tape recorder. Am I appropriating someone else's culture? No, I don't see it that way. I'm Armenian. Does that mean I could only write about the Armenian experience in America? I don't want to be doing that. Does that mean the Latino can only write about the Latino experience, and the black only the black, and the Asian only the Asian? No. This is kind of where we're headed right now in this country, that a writer doesn't have a right to explore another culture and tell that story. That, to me, is what I love about this. I get to meet folks that are outside my culture and try to tell their story. I don't pretend to know their story. I don't pretend to get inside it. I want to tell it as a historian, as a writer, and maybe as a novelist. So the meeting of these people, the spending time with them, the getting their oral histories down is the most fun. But then you have to transcribe all those tapes, and oh, what a pain that is. You know, hours and hours, but you have to do it because you have to hear their voices again and let those voices marinate. And then that's when the story starts taking shape. And then you outline, well, how am I going to write this thing? Well, I told you at the beginning of this that my first outline wasn't sustainable itself. It was requiring, you know, it was all present day, and then boom, you'd flashback back to the past. But they weren't flashbacks. They were long digressions. So how do you then organize? And so that outline changed. And then finally, it's the writing. Unlike fiction writing, where you can start writing and just go, you have to stop your writing to say, okay, wait a second, where was that at? What you know, let me go to the transcribed page and find that. Let me go to the document and find that, the historical documents. So it's really done in fits and starts. But it's got its own beauty, especially as I was moving toward the end. I was able to put aside all my notes and just write from a place of liberation. And so the last part of the book, the last 40 pages before you get to the epilogue, where you're with the Resnicks again. But those last 40 pages, I almost did it in kind of a trance. Just what did we just get through, reader? What was that? You know, what did we do here? So each of these things has their their just being a pain in the backside, and then each of them has a kind of joy too.
All right, and we have one more question from Lisa. When is the anticipated publication date of your novel, and will that be your first foray into fiction?
Some would say I've been foraying into fiction for a long time. but yeah, I've been playing with this thing. There was a story that really touched me when I was an LA Times reporter, and it took place there were two spots. It was a murder. It took place between Delano and Allensworth, with which both have incredible histories. Delano is where the United Farm Workers was basically launched. It's where Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta founded that thing. And then Allensworth is this little tiny settlement that was begun by African Americans, old slaves who came west. They founded this settlement, the first settlement founded by slaves in the West. And so the backdrop is very rich, and I have these characters that are rich. I captured some of them in journalism, but I wasn't able to get to the depths of this story, and I'm hoping that fiction allows me to do that. Right now, I've got a nonfiction project that I have to finish. It's going to take me a year, but it's allowing me to. Some of the days I'm spending writing the novel, so I'm hoping to finish the novel in a couple years, and see what happens. I mean, the road of literature is literally littered with nonfiction writers who tried to turn themselves into fiction writers. So I understand that, but I feel like my writing is only going to get to that next place if I try. So that's it on that one.
Now, so your stories, did you are they stories that came because of when you said, I'm going to write the book, and then you kind of wanted to say the stories, or you've been writing about environmental stuff and water stuff all your career? Did they come as you were writing some of those stories and you wanted to learn more, or was it the chicken or the egg first?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it's both. This book required me to go to places I'd never gone before, but it also required me to go back to the King of California. I mean, you can't tell the story of water in California without revisiting the Boswell story. When I was growing up in the Valley, and the other question is, could an outsider have written this book? No, it's written from an insider's perspective. It's written from a boy who grew up in the Valley. I think that gives it a different kind of feel, and maybe it helps the reader get through it. Although I've had some reviews on in Amazon where some people have said, he should get out of he shouldn't be in this book. And I thought, God, that's the whole reason why I wanted to write it. I wanted to, but some people reacted, very few, but a couple reacted strongly to that. So it comes from both. And, growing up here, I often wondered, okay, there was all these incredible cultures here, but there was a dominant kind of white Southern culture. And some of it I could understand because it was the Dust Bowl Okies who left the Dust Bowl and came west. And I felt that, I talk about, I think it's the opening of the book where, I have a twang on my Armenian tongue. Where'd that twang come from? Well, it's grown up with all these kids whose families, came from Oklahoma and Arkansas. But there's also a deeper South story, how the plantation South came west with the cotton culture. And, they brought their African-American workers with them. They brought their mint juleps. So it's I'm trying to understand this place. It's a puzzle to me. It remains a puzzle. And hopefully by the time I'm done and I've written my last sentence, I will have figured the mystery of this place out more. I'll know more of it. But it was William Saroyan, who was a friend of my grandfather's, a great writer, who said that you have to write about what you know in the language that you know it. And so I don't apologize. For now, my fiction is going to go to the middle of California. Faulkner, all the great writers had a place that they wrote from. That place is America. That place is the world. And so you keep digging and digging into that place. And so hopefully by the time I'm done, I've left behind this body of work that really says something about a place that is so overlooked in the kind of American landscape. So yeah, this book, I picked up threads that I had had picked up in my journalism and in my earlier book writing, and I continue with them, and some were entirely new threads.
Thank you. Now, what is the reception that you've gotten from the book? You mentioned a few already from some of the Amazon reviews, but do you know, are policymakers or farmers reading it? What is it, the general public that's reading it? Like, who's reading it?
Yeah.
What kind of other responses are you getting from the different audiences?
So the paperback came out in the middle of the lockdown, and I had all these paperback presentations I was going to give. You know, it's been reissued as a paperback now, and I was at all these universities up and down California to go again, and that all got shut down. In fact, this is the first book-related talk I've given in 3 months. But when I got the cover for the paperback, and at the top it said a national bestseller, and I thought, oh, wait a second. So the book has sold, you know, I mean, listen, this is not Stephen King bestseller, but this is, for a serious piece of nonfiction, it became a national bestseller. And I think there was real high hopes for the paperback to sell even more. I think that's been hurt by COVID, and God knows, you know, people are going through much bigger tragedies because of it. But you know, this book's going to be around a while. I wrote it, and that's I think what's so important about the history. I wrote it so this book, you know, you could pick it up 50 years from now, and it's part of the canon of California. Those half a dozen books that tell you the story of what we did here, how we did it, and was it madness? Was it folly? Was it, you know, magic? It was all those things.
Kaylee, do you have another question?
I do not.
Oh, so there's another question. So, Mark, so how do you keep hedge funds at bay that will bring a culture of extraction to the valley that operates on an international level? They are capable of extracting every drop from the valley and exporting.
It is kind of an exportation, because it's an extraction and exporting, because, you know, and some of that is good for the small farmer too. He's selling his crops to Asia and India and all that, and Europe. I don't know. It is the big question. It's at several different levels. I really admire these family farmers who've been able to keep it going for 4 and 5 generations, where the kids see that there's something, you know, hip about being a farmer now, growing stuff. But a lot of them couldn't make it on 40, 80 acres, you know. Almonds and nuts have helped them because they're getting returns that raisins didn't give. But I don't know. I feel very pessimistic about the ability of small. And, you know, some of these kids don't want to go into farming. They want to be doctors or lawyers or, you know, whatever, businessmen. How do you keep that going? Right now, the Canadian Royal Mounties have a retirement fund that's investing a huge amount in farmland. The Mormon Church is one of the biggest owners of farmland it may very well be the biggest owner of farmland in the world, but it's a big owner of California farmland. What happens then is you hire what's called custom farmers to farm that ground, but it's owned by somebody else. So I don't know. Is this capitalism? Is this the inevitability of capitalism, that more and more of the capital gets concentrated into smaller and smaller hands? You look at the stock market. How is the stock market, in the midst of this Great Depression that we're going through, unemployment and the pandemic, how is it able to go up 5,000 points in a few months? It's come down now in the last couple of days, but it's operating with a kind of in a kind of realm that's separate and apart from reality. And so, and maybe this is what young folks taking to the streets was all about. You know, maybe the murder of George Floyd taps in not only into racism and things like that, but it taps into a kind of system, the structure of it, which has created an ungodly kind of, you know, income gap. I mean, it's just crazy. Those of you who know history know that we had a Gilded Age in the 20s where there was tremendous concentration of wealth. We're worse than the Gilded Age today. So I don't know. I don't know where all this is headed. I was telling my two sons who still live with me and they're college age, you're living through an incredible time. What's going to become of all this? Where is it headed? Great structural changes have to come. Now, I'm afraid that we're going to become so doctrinaire in the other extreme that people are going to take away my ability to use language and write about the things I want to write about. That I'm no longer allowed to write about other cultures. Okay? This novel takes place, the kid who's murdered is African American. Will I not be able to write about that? So, anyhow, this is such a large conversation, but it's a conversation that has to be large because we're talking about resources, natural resources, and who gets to own those resources. And if they get to own them, then how do they spread the wealth to people? Or does that wealth just go into a few pockets? Agriculture didn't grow in an egalitarian way in the valley, but that doesn't mean we need to get rid of agriculture, because what are we going to replace it with? A bunch of houses and mini malls so that this place looks like LA? I don't. That would be another kind of tragedy.
Mm-hmm. Mark, a little bit of a follow-up to an earlier question. Have you heard any feedback from policymakers? Do you know if they're reading it or they've talked about it? Any comments or general thoughts about?
Well, you know,
ones?
I met with the governor at Sam's Deli. He had read it and loved it. That was kind of neat. I've talked to people, you know, the Department of Water Resources and stuff who are using the book to try to strengthen the hand of SGMA. I've met with the governor's, you know, top water resources guy at a big book reading I did up in Chico. So yeah, no, it's gotten into a lot of. I mean, the water world obviously has, you know, a lot of folks, bureaucrats and private folks who have read it. And so I think it's created a real conversation and, you know, and an appreciation for what we built and the history of it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's gotten out there, and I've had some really, really extraordinary feedback. It's fun to read. And
that's great to hear. How about farmers specifically?
Oh yeah, the farmers.
You know,
I mean,
is it impartial? Is it biased? What?
Yeah. No, the farmers are. It's interesting. So I was driving down to Kern County to meet with the biggest farmers. You know, the biggest carrot growers in the world. You know, all these families who have such history running through them. And it was at night at a golf course over there in Bakersfield, Stockdale. And I was driving, I entered the gates of this place. This place had started, it went back to, I think it was Ben Ollie Hagen who fought with Henry Miller over water. And Hagen was the third richest man in America at the time. These two titans were fighting over their agriculture empires. And I think this golf course has its history back then. So I'm driving it, and it's dark. And my headlights are the only thing lighting this road. And on both sides are these trees, and it looks like I'm going into this old southern plantation. I'm thinking, my God, this is a lynching. I'm going to be going into a lynching mob. So I go to the country club, and these guys are all dressed up in their suits. The only thing I had screwed up is I was wearing a suit. I was wearing a jacket and tie, but I dressed up in I think it was either jeans or chinos, and there was a couple guys were looking down. You know, it violated the dress code. But anyhow, they had this fancy meal. They served this big piece of meat, steak, prime rib. I don't eat beef, so they brought out something for me. So I got up and I started talking about this book, and they said, at the end, they had these questions, and they said, we know what we have to do. We overdeveloped farmland by at least a third. We got to get rid of it. And so I thought, man, and they all love the book, appreciate it. And then I go up to San Francisco, and I see the most hardcore environmentalists, and they love the book. And I'm thinking, my goodness, these two groups that don't even talk to each other, the book has become this kind of common ground to them that they don't even know it. So that's what I was telling the governor was, you know, we can get the environmental community and the big farmers together and find a way if we could just stop demonizing each other. Yes. And I got that insight because both groups were so positive toward the book. I mean, the book is critical here and there, but they know the truth. If you can get past all the BS politics, they know the truth and they appreciate the willingness. Because I take on the environmental viewpoint when I'm up in the Delta, those chapters. You know, it's just not so simple as to try to save the smelt and the salmon. There's something else going on there. And I think the farmer appreciated that. So, you know, that's kind of a perspective that I just earned through writing this book.
Thank you, Mark. And we're really sorry that we weren't able to do this in person, because then you could sign all of our books. So maybe sometime in the future we can get.
Well, you're going to keep. Is this your continuing book club? Do the members change, or is this the folks who read books and stuff?
We read books on water, so it's a very specific book club.
Okay. And
so we'll probably pick another book, or if anybody wants to read one of Mark's books with me over the summer or over the fall, we'll talk about what to read next. And then
why don't we do this? Why don't I, one of these times, when the lockdown's over and we can, you know, get together even in a physical distancing way, why don't you connect me to the book that you're reading? It doesn't have to be mine, whatever it is. It's probably, if it's a water book, I probably read it. So I'll join you guys, and then.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, you could bring this book, or if some of you have the King of California, and I'll sign them. So let's plan on doing that. Hopefully, it'll happen, you know, sooner than later. Let's put it that way.
Awesome, thank you. We appreciate that. So we had a few comments in the chat section for you. So I'll make sure to put those together and email those to you, and hopefully we'll fix your Zoom for the next time. And thank you so much.
I don't
really
know. This is the third time.
Here.
I think I'm zoomed, and so we'll figure it out. So anyhow, good to join all of you. Thanks for doing this. I'm really upset that we couldn't even, you know, I would have been able to see all of your faces. Is that how it would have been, Laura, on smaller screens?
Yes, but we'll send you pictures.
God dang it. Okay, cool.
But you could have seen the smiles, the laughs.
Yeah. Damn it, that's really
the nodding, the agreeing.
Yeah. The middle finger, whatever. Yeah.
But on behalf of all of us, we want to thank you for your time. We really appreciate you answering all of these questions for us. Any last comments from anyone that you want to unmute yourself really quick?
Take care.
Laura, this is Sarge Green, Mark.
Hey, Sarge.
Hey, what do you think of Don Wright's blog?
You know, Don Wright's a buddy of mine. I kind of pushed him on this thing years ago, and I think it's getting better. You know, he reflects obviously a certain, you know, viewpoint, but I think Don's not going to load up on things. I mean, he's going to be kind as much as he can to ag and the farmers, and sometimes he has a few little blind spots because of that. but he's in these meetings, man. He's doing the work that no one, you know, and I think my friend Lois Henry's trying to do that too with her San Joaquin Valley water, her deal too. I think we need these because we're losing journalists. I mean, well, first of all, there's no one covering water in the middle of the state anymore. Sacramento Bee has a few. The LA Times has one or two reporters. So I think these blogs become more important because we've lost, you know, the journalists going into meetings and seeing what's happening. So do you have, you guys work with Don a little bit?
Yeah, well, we helped incubate him. We
There
took
you go.
our Valley Ventures here at the WET Center at Fresno State Center for Irrigation Technology. And by the way, Lois is the daughter of my former counsel out at Tranquility, Jerry Henry.
Oh yeah, Jerry. Yeah, no. So I think those things are really good. I'm hoping
Real good.
Lois keeps signing up folks because she's doing original reporting. I mean, it was Lois who went into some of these Sigma meetings and found that some of the farmers were upset at the other farmers for pushing models that they felt weren't sustainable. So we got to have those bodies in those rooms to tell those stories. And you know, Don's doing a good job, and so is Lois. So yeah, bravo for you guys underwriting that.
Thank you, Mark. Again, we really appreciate your time today and look forward to meeting you in person one day when the lockdown is lifted.
Yeah, same here. Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. We'll keep in touch.